I'm fine, thanks. Oh, well, if I can think of something to say. Thanks. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you all here at the Geneva Press Club for this side event to the International Labour Conference. Today's topic is towards a sustainable fishery economy in the 21st century, challenges and requisite conditions, case example from Taiwan and Indonesia. Our moderator today will be Professor Lichia Saner-Yiu. Professor Lichia Saner-Yiu is the founder of the Center for Socio-Economic Development in Geneva, a non-for-profit NGO focusing on socio-economic research, reform of the public sector, and sustainable development. She has conducted different policy-related research for OECD and the ILO. She is also a consultant to the United Nations Development Programme and other specialized UN agencies. Before giving you the floor, Professor Saner-Yiu, I will ask you to all our guests and speakers to sign our gold book and to receive a little present from the press club. So it's a book back on Micropiece 2016. Professor Saner, you have the floor.
Tobias, and it's a great honor to be able to have this event here at the press club today. And I also wanted to just to announce that we have the special honor of having the ambassador Jean-Marie Ezo to be present amongst our participants. Ambassador Ezo, he is the permanent representative of the or observer of the African Union in Geneva, and also formerly the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Benin. And previously, he was also ambassador of Benin in New York and different countries, but also have been taking on sort of a public role in the sense of within the nation of within the family of nations. He has been taking roles within UNDP on the board and other various important functions. So we're very honored that you agreed to join us, and at the end of the presentation by the panelists, that you will give also a few comments about seeing this whole fishery economy from an African Union's perspective. So thank you very much. So let me just briefly position today's presentation, and we would like to look at, maybe we can have the lights off a bit. We would like to position this particular side event within the SDGs goals, as this is a policy umbrella for the next 15 years that we're all going to work for, at least for most part, in most of the people and organizations in Geneva. So I would like to say that, yes, directly we have a few things to contribute in terms of fishery, and I think, that will be about conservation of ocean resources, but also about looking at decent work for a very important segment of the workforce. According to the ILO, I think people working in very poor conditions, there are about 21 million of the fishery workers. But if you look at NGOs number, then it's very, it's much bigger. The gap is about 11 million. So according to the Working Free as NGOs, there are actually 32 million of the fishery workers are working under very poor conditions. So I think, if we could somehow advance this agenda a little bit, we could contribute to SDG 8 and 14, of course, reducing some of the poverty that we're facing today, and also as a very important food security source. Maybe we can also work to see whether there's a combination about improving working conditions and also sustaining of the ocean resources. As we know that fish is very important today already for the poor people and also for health-conscious population. But in the future, we will see that the world resources has to be much more carefully and much utilized, and fish is a really very good source of protein because it's most efficient. With all that done, I think one of the key drivers is really the responsible consumption and production patterns. I think unless all the consumers are changing behaviors, it will be very difficult to put pressure on the current practices of fishery industry at the moment. And learning from the current experience in Europe, we know that if we don't reduce inequality, and it will be very difficult to achieve peace and justice. So I'm presenting a very complex picture because this is what we're going to hear from the panel this evening, coming from different angles, from legal, from the labor conventions, from practices on the ground, and also from a sort of, a total system perspective, how can we really tackle this sector, which has too long been under the radar screen and actually is a very big black hole on the map. Somebody changed my slides briefly, so I think I'm already coming too much forward to say leaving no one behind, as the Secretary General remind us as the sort of the aspiration and the ambitious goal for the next 15 years. So with this as opening, I would like to introduce tonight's speakers. In the sequence of this presentation, we will have David to start, and he will give us an overview of this economy, this new sector. We hope this is going to be blue ocean from the UNCTAD perspective. And then we have Professor Li. He is going to give us, and also formerly working with the ILO, so he's going to bring in the not only human rights perspective, but also see the overlapping areas between human rights and the labor conventions. And next to him is Peter. Peter, he has been also working for the ILO for many years, and also has been very bravely working, not briefly, bravely working, very bravely working, trying to provide inspection and trying to shed the light on what is actually happening on the ocean-going ships. That is, in terms of working and living conditions, because many fishermen actually never get off and step their feet on the land once they have been signed on to this employment situation. We originally going to have Mr. John Albert Situmean from Indonesia. Unfortunately, there's a change, so he's absent. So instead, his story will be presented by Professor Liuhuang. Li-chuan has been doing both case studies and field visits in Indonesia and also in Taiwan. So he's going to bring the whole broad macro pictures down to really concrete in terms of what's happening in the national context. And then the last one, I would introduce Mr. Claude. Claude has been working for the FAO and the World Bank for his past life, but since his retirement, he has been working on biotrade, Nagoya Protocol, and also looking at sort of different forms of land management in order to achieve food security through better management of the land resources. So I think you could see tonight we have a very full agenda, and I would say no further and pass the word to David. And Raymond, my better half, and always been the backbone of my life, has been conveniently forgotten for a moment. I apologize for that.
But I will keep time.
So Raymond, he's actually going to be the moderator, a very complicated task of keeping time this evening. But of course, he also has his own contributions to make at the appropriate moment. He's been working on the OECD guideline for multinational enterprises for the past 3 or 4 years. And as you know, that today, the fishery is very much in the hands of few major companies around the world. So perhaps we can, with his contribution at the end, we can bring all this diverse thread of conversation into one common one. So please, David.
Do you want me to stand up? Or?
Probably. You can switch whatever.
I cannot see.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here tonight with all of you. Thank you for the invitation by CSEN, the Club Suisse de la Presse, and the university. Sorry, I cannot pronounce it in China, Taipei. I'm going to address the issue of trade and environment aspects of fisheries. As it was mentioned before, many people is talking now about the blue economy, the oceans economy. Here we have one of the fathers of the blue economy in the audience, so I feel honored of his presence. The blue economy is somehow, you can see it encapsulated in Sustainable Development Goal 14, conserve and sustainable use oceans and marine resources. The difference between the blue economy and the green economy and the traditional economy is that you are subject to a totally different system. You are subject to a multi-jurisdictional system, multi-agency, multi-treaty, you are subject to stronger cross-border effects that you have in the atmosphere, and finally, you're dealing with vessels and fish that move. So it's a much more complicated equation than when we see it in land. Here we have just a slide of a partial picture of how the ocean's governance work in the world. This is partial because I'm missing 3 treaties. I didn't have the time to put all of them. I'm missing the Nagoya Protocol, the UNFCCC, and I'm missing another one, the ILO 188 convention. So I have to expand it. Obviously, my bias was coming for trade and environment. But here we can see that the ocean governance is complex. At the end, to your right, you can see more the fisheries type of agreement, fisheries conservation agreements. In the middle, all the maritime transport under the IMO. At the center, UN clause, the Constitution of the Oceans with main principles and freedoms. Here we have the Environmental Convention agreements, where we have several that are important. CITES, Convention of Biological Diversity, and in the corner, the trade ones, which also are relevant for the flows on trading goods. So it's a very complicated equation. The most recent comer to this chart is the Port State Measures Agreement that just entered into force 2 days ago, on Sunday, and is dealing with illegal, unregulated, and unreported fisheries. The importance of this governance is that to move anything is very complicated. They usually work in silos, so now we have Sustainable Development Goal 14, so everybody is aligned, everybody has to do a contribution. I will be talking a little bit of the food aspects, the environment aspects, and the trade aspects. Now, this chart is very well known. It's a chart from FAO. Basically, we're talking about which is the status of fisheries today. I don't know if I'm missing, no, I'm not missing slides. Basically, since the 1970s, we have been increasingly using fish stocks. Today, the level of fully fished and overfished is more than 80%. Only a small layer of less than 20% is underfished, and usually these are not commercial targeted species. So we are basically going to the limits of what is out there. Okay? The management is not going really well because we keep increasing the section on overfishes, which are species that are really starting to be threatened. The current level of wild catch is 90 million, 10 million tons freshwater, 80 million salty water or seawater. Now, even if we apply good management policies, we might not grow a lot in the next 15 years because we're already over-depleted and the capacity of recovery of the stocks is very limited. All this is consequence, number one, of overfishing, but also pollution and lack or ineffective fish management systems. So basically, we're reaching the limits and recovery is very slow. Message. Now we have to those some additional problems that are coming really fast. We can see it this year. We got the warmest winter ever. Okay, this is a nice chart. This is from January, March 2016, just coming out of the press. And this is not IPCC, which is the international recognized body. This is the NOAA, the North American Oceans and Atmospheric Agency. So I'm talking the most biased perspective you might have in my perspective. So we need to see. And they are saying we are hitting sea surface records on highest temperatures in most of the most important fishing areas in the world. Okay, so this is very important. This is going to change the chemistry of the ocean. This is going to change the pattern of migration of fish. This is going to change many other things. So let's be ready. Here we have IPCC, which is usually does scenarios. And in an interesting scenario, looking at the next 30 years, 40 years, basically, we have a 2 centigrade Celsius raise in the temperature of the oceans. We will have a 60% disruption in biomass. Fish will migrate to different areas, to colder areas, and the strongest impacts are going to be felt in the tropics. So dear fisheries producers, Senegal, Philippines, Indonesia, Taiwan, get ready. Because the fish is going to migrate somewhere else. And we have to also take into consideration that we are not reducing emissions, even if we implement the Paris Agreement. Let's dream, the Paris Agreement is fully implemented. We are not curbing emissions, even with the Paris Agreement, until 2030, in the best case scenario. So we have emitted, we will emit, and all that will accumulate. So let's get ready. Now, how important is the fishery sector for countries? This is data that is very well known, but I have up-to-date one. Basically, fisheries can be from 1% to 3% of full GDP of all countries. In the case of seeds, it's 3%, LDCs is 2.5%, and it's also important for many developing countries, 1%, etc. Now, the flows in trade are growing in value. I mentioned the catch is not growing. What it's growing is the value of fish. It means there is less fish. And the exports have been increasingly dramatically from about a little bit more than 100 million in US dollar, 100 billion in US dollar, to 142 billion in 2014. This is the closest I can get with UN statistics. What is important here of this chart is not that the value is increasing. What is important is that from 2010 onwards, we have a decouple process by which developed countries used to be the main harvester and exporter of fish and seafood products, now are developing countries. Today is 56%. This means that developing countries will have a higher level of responsibility on fish stock conservation and will have a higher share of trade. These statistics, though, is harvested fish and also aquaculture output. Okay? Also in aquaculture, developing countries will be dominating by 2030. Okay? Why? Because for aquaculture facility, you need a space and many other elements. Okay? So this is what's going to happen in the future. Now, which are the main threats to sustainable fisheries today? These are two of the most important. There are many. I can mention pollution, etc., but I'm trying to link it to the most trade-related ones. The number one is what we call...
David, two more minutes.
Okay, I'll do my best. The most important threats are IUU, which is illegally unregulated and unreported fishing. It has been estimated that it is about 11 to 26 million tons of the catch. This is about 20% of the catch. It's huge. Second, that the value is about 10 to 23 billion, it's a little bit lower. Now, there have been important global efforts to deter, fight, reduce IUU. Two of the first, the IUU plan of action to deter, IUU, the compliance agreement to have cheap registers, and the port state measures agreement that came into force recently are the three main pillars on the FAO. The port state measures agreement is an important one because it will allow ports to stop, not allow landing and refueling and restoring all the necessary equipment for going out of the seas if you are suspect or you don't let verification and monitoring on the legality of the catch. I was checking this morning because we have a strong social component here. There are no links with ILO. There are no links with labor standard. It's only linked to the catch and to environment principles, but it's not linked to labor. So that has not been addressed. The importance of IUU is that it's linked usually to other illegal activities. Usually illegal activities come together. It's that drug dealing comes with corruption, bribery, etc. IUU fishing usually go together with slave labor, very low application labor standards, especially on the crew, and also smuggling of different nature. So we need to take this into consideration. The second threat that we have now, we are discussing, there have been many proposals by both developed and developing countries, an issue of subsidies. There is a huge amount of subsidies, estimated at 35 billion. If you see that we are exporting 142 and we have 35 billion in subsidies, it's almost again 20%. It's huge. And you are giving subsidies for an activity over an already exploited resource. So it makes non-economic sense, non-environmental sense. I don't have more time. If you have questions, there is more in the presentation. We can discuss later. Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, David. That was really quite an opening in terms of setting the scene and also laying out the problem. So I wanted just to follow up with what you said. I think we have been looking at the linkages between the environment and economic activities, but somehow we are overlooking the social aspect.
For sure.
So I think we have to bring that in. Otherwise, we cannot really sort of look at sustainable solutions. So this is a great entry for inviting Li to give his presentation and comments.
Thank you. After that opening of disaster impending.
Sorry, sir.
Yes, I was an official with the ILO for many years in the standards department. And I can say that in all that time, the question of conditions of work in fisheries was very little paid attention to. It is a question that should be paid attention to, but is not. Now, there are many international standards that should affect the conditions of work of fishing people. It's a complicated equation, but it's there. There are, of course, the basic human rights standards of the United Nations system, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the two covenants, and the others that apply and indeed have been fairly widely ratified. But these are general standards. They're standards that attempt to set conditions of human rights for everyone, and they don't go much into detail. There are also a number of ILO standards that affect human rights generally. There are the basic human rights conventions of the ILO, those on freedom of association, forced labor, child labor, discrimination, all of which are very, very extensively violated where fishing people are concerned, and where the enforcement is low. Corruption was mentioned. Corruption is high, where multinational enterprises contrive to escape the attention of national law enforcement agencies, and national law enforcement agencies find it very difficult to enforce these standards on board fishing vessels. Now, the principles are quite well laid down. There is the Declaration of 1998 on the fundamental principles and rights at work, and these four sets of ILO conventions, which make it clear that we must remember fishing people have human rights. Whatever the specific conventions that have been ratified are, whatever they have been, whatever the law enforcement conditions are, we do have the basic principle of the application of human rights to all workers and all people. Yeah. What is lacking is enforcement. Now, as far as the major conventions of the ILO on human rights, the ones on freedom of association, forced labor, child labor and discrimination, of the countries concerned here, Indonesia has ratified all of them. So have most other countries around the world ratified some or all. Taiwan is, of course, in the unusual position of not being able to ratify them. That is a question that I expect will come up as we go through, and I and some of the rest of us have been working with Taiwan on how to implement those standards in spite of the lack of ratification. But they are not well respected, partly because fishing vessels are far from sight. We don't see them. Law enforcement agencies don't deal with them. There are also very specific conventions and standards on the conditions of work of fishing people. Convention number 188, adopted in 2007, is an extensive treatment of the conditions under which fishing people should work. It has not been widely ratified yet. We hope it will be, but it frankly seems unlikely that the countries in which these violations are taking place will commit themselves to international supervision and international assistance to promote the rights of fishing people under the present conditions. It is rather like the conventions on migrant workers, which is also a subject that is closely dealt with here. There are extensive conventions on migrant workers, ratified often by sending countries, but not by receiving countries, because the countries concerned do not wish to obligate themselves and to be subject to public supervision on them. Now, the subject of labor standards, I teach a course in this that goes on for 8 weeks. I won't attempt that today, so we'll leave it at that. But let's say that there are sufficient standards. The problem is application, awareness, visibility, and above all, national will to enforce these standards and to put them into practice. That is what's lacking, and that is what we will continue to face as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Li. I think you have really summarized very succinctly. It's really about lacking of political will to do something and do the right thing. I think we know the right thing, what are the right things are, but it's to really sort of have a commitment to put the words into practice. And I would, this is also a great way of introducing Peter with his work of trying to make sure enforcement actually happen, at least through inspection, so we have some transparency about what is actually going on. So please, Peter.
Okay, right, thanks, thank you. Okay, let's just get on to the right one. Shall I just click?
This one.
Yeah, okay, so yeah. Okay. What I wanted to do was talk about the whole issue of improving working and living conditions on board fishing vessels, which is actually work that the ILO linked to the FAO has actually started to pick up to actually put some flesh on the bones of the fundamental principles at work and go into detail in terms of the fisheries. Why is it not working?
Okay, is this okay? Yeah, it's okay.
Okay. I just wanted to quickly say, if we're going to talk about the supply chain for what I call the fish and seafood industry, we're not just talking about fishing. We're also talking about aquaculture, fish farming, and we're talking about fish processing, because often the same multinational companies are working between all three sectors. And if we're dealing with fishing, we're dealing with fishing. If we're dealing with aquaculture, we're dealing with agriculture. And by the time we get to fish processing, we're dealing with manufacturing. So we've got three different sets of labour standards and labour conditions that could potentially apply. Now, I'm not going to go through all this, but just to make the point, fish provides a lot of protein, a lot of basic income, employment for a lot of people. And the figures are that it can provide up to 10 to 12% livelihoods for 10 to 12% of the world's population. And it's no guess that a lot of those will be the poor part of the world's population. And when we're talking about fishing, we're obviously talking about commercial and small scale. Okay, and this is Samut Sakhon in Thailand, where we were working out of. Okay, I don't know why. Okay. Now, I just want to make a few points. Commercial fishing, first of all, we're dealing with transnational companies and with national companies. We're dealing with complex supply chains. We're dealing with big business. So when you get a piece of tuna on your plate, or you buy in some sort of tropical species, it's come through a big complex supply chain, and it'll be the tuna industry in the Philippines or Thailand or Indonesia or wherever that's that's dealing with it. And the other thing we have to factor in, and it was alluded to briefly by David, is we have to deal with the whole issue of port state and flag state registration. We haven't got time to go into it, but it's perfectly possible for a vessel to be owned by someone in Switzerland in this room this evening, be registered and working out of Taiwan, but the actual flag state to which which it pays a lot of money could be in Panama. That's the reality of this industry, and that's why it's such a difficult industry to manage. Now, I don't have to tell people that we're dealing with a poor to exploitative industry. Basic labour rights are weak, forced labour trafficking, lack of legal and social protection, weak compliance and enforcement, and we're dealing with an industry where, in many countries, migrant labour is predominant. If you're out in the boats in Thailand, you'll be out with the Burmese and Cambodian workers, and they're literally there's 33 people on the boat, 30 of those are the Burmese. This is also the paradox that these are the poor people of the world. It's ironic that the people in fishing and agriculture who feed 6 billion, 7 billion people every day of their life often are the poorest people on this planet who can't afford to feed themselves and their families. It's one of the great ironies, it's one of the great scandals, and it happens in both fishing and agriculture. It's also one of the most dangerous. If you want to live a long, healthy life, the advice is don't go into fishing. It's one of the most poor. You add in agriculture. You can just see a few of the figures, but basically very much high death rates, even in the so-called industrialized countries. So even in countries where fishing is industrialized, you've got much higher death rates compared to the national death rates in a factory or wherever. It's a dangerous thing. The data for developing countries, well, we just simply don't have it. We just simply don't know the deaths, the level of fatalities, the level of accidents, the level of ill health in these countries. Now, we're not going to have time to go much into detail, but there's two areas I want to signal that we need to sort of concentrate on in terms of improving working and living conditions. One of the reasons why it's poorly regulated, why fishers get such poor conditions, is the employment relations in fishing are unclear. The link between a so-called employer and a so-called worker is vague. It's a grey area. So, you know, the question we often have to ask is, who employs the crew? Is it a vessel owner? Is he or she in charge of the crew? Is it the skipper on a boat? Is it a private employment agency? And of course, you get the fact in fishing that a lot of fishers say, we are working as share of the catch, the payment system, we are self-employed. In other words, we are not hired labour. And this is the way that a lot of regulations and stuff is dodged. Give you a very practical example. If you're in Thailand and you're the vessel owner, you'll probably be financing the fishing trip. There's no life jackets on boats in Thailand, not the ones I've been out on. And the skippers are not going to ask for the extra thousands of bahts to actually get the life jackets. So in the end, the boats go out with life jackets. So, you know, if there was an accident and someone was drowned, would it be the vessel owner or the skipper you would take to court in a theoretical situation? These are the real problems, and this is one of the big areas we've been trying to sort out in terms of employment relationships and improving the working and living conditions. The last area is the one that Lichia has already referred to, is the whole business of inspection, compliance and enforcement. Working and living conditions on board the fishing vessel, which is now covered by Article 42 of Convention 188, work in the fishing sector. One of the basic problems you have in fishing is it's split jurisdictions. I think David mentioned it. But basically, is it the Labour Department? Is it the Maritime or Fisheries Agent? Or is it a Transport Department? Or is it the Navy? So actually, who is responsible for the inspections? The answer is no one's clear, and it varies from country to country. But often traditional labour inspection stops at the shoreline. It won't go further. The reality is few inspections are carried out on board vessels at sea. It doesn't happen. And there are very practical difficulties of getting on boats. You know, if you think about it, if you want to actually go out on inspection, you have to have a boat, you have to be trained just for your own health and safety. So in fact, very few inspections happen. If there's going to be any inspection on health and safety, on wages, on labour conditions, it's going to be in the port. But the port states and the flag state inspection systems don't talk to each other at the minute. That's one of the areas we've got to tackle, we've got to bring on board and think it through. Now, I could say a lot more, but I think that should give you some food for thought. So I'll pass you on there. Thank you.
I thank both Li and Peter together because they really sort of delineate a very complex situation. Besides, you know, jurisdiction and the national boundaries, is actually the practice. How can we find out what is actually going on with the life on the fishing boat out in the sea? And I think, you know, the one comment made by Peter was very poignant, is to say that we have, you know, the 20% of the poorest people on the earth actually feeding the rest of the world population. And they don't seem to earn an honest living from their effort and hard work. And I think, you know, playing with words is one of the specialty of Geneva about, you know, sort of using ambiguous words. But in this case, I think we just got a very clear indication. Words do mean something, and words do affect life. So with that definition of employment relations and sharing of the catch, we moved the responsibility of social protection from the employer to the employed. So I think that is something that we might want to work further. So with that note, I would like to invite Professor Liuhuang Lijuan to give some very in-depth case studies, both in Indonesia and in Taiwan, so that we could see how does this all legal structures or lack of legal structures and lack of practices and translating laws into action actually mean to people on the ground and living on the fish.
Thank you, Lichia. Unfortunately, our Indonesian representative cannot come here. Obviously, he received some pressures from his country, and so either from government or from the recruitment agency. So he just expressed his regrets that he cannot come. So, but since today, my case is mainly focusing on the Indonesian migrant fishermen recruited by the Taiwanese vessels. So I think I can try to make all the stories more complete, and then we can see how the picture of this kind of maritime violence and forced labor cases happened at sea, and mainly on the Taiwanese vessels. Okay, so leave home happily and return home safely. I think that is a traffic slogan. Everyone should be happy. And I think that is also the basic hope for migrant workers who are working abroad. In Taiwan, we have two kinds of recruitment forms for foreign fishermen employment in Taiwan. The first one is inshore hiring, in accordance with the Employment Service Act, and while the other one is offshore hiring. The most problematic happened for the offshore hiring, because for the offshore hiring, according to the definition of the Ministry of Labor, they think that since they did their contract offshore, so it is out of the Taiwan territory. So all the people that they recruited, they are excluded from the protection of national legislation. Okay, and that is why there are so many loopholes and there are so many problems mainly happening on this kind of offshore hiring system. Okay. That is one, I think that was one of the most biggest problems since these offshore hiring Indonesian fishermen, for example, they recruited in the A port and then dismissed in the B port. So sometimes they never get access to stay in the Taiwanese, in the port of Taiwan, or they are forced, to working at sea for years without even got any opportunity to have a rest, or because of this kind of 2-year long labor contract. So they are under the pressure to fulfill the obligation of the contract, and that will make them try to sustain all the kind of difficulties happen at sea. And you can imagine for the Indonesian migrant workers who come to work on the Taiwanese vessels, the recruitment agency, they claim that they don't need to pay any recruitment fees as long as they get bored and they can get reduced by the monthly wages. But with such kind of a high rate of interest, so normally these migrant fishermen, they get indebted immediately after they get bored. So that is kind of systematic. I think that is kind of systematic way to force them put in a vulnerable situation. First, they have problems with language communication with the captains, with the staff. And also, I'm happy that David and also Peter highlights about this kind of, for example, the situation happening with the FOC boats and the IUU link with cost down labor and forced labor, such kind of things. And Peter mentioned about the migrant fishermen who are short of training, so high risk of occupational disease and incidents happening in the Taiwanese vessels. And the problem is, since they are immediately recruited, for example, at the A port, and then dismissed at the B port, so normally they don't have any time, to receive well-trained and to have a kind of coordinated or teamwork or team play together with the captain. and that make this kind of accidents increase. So when I visited the Indonesian fishermen in April, and so the IFF, the Indonesian Fishermen Federation, complains that there are hundreds of death cases, including falling at sea, or disappearance, or simply get injured, or get beaten at sea and died. So here I want to highlight just a few cases which is quite significant, and since they are widely reported by the national and also international media. So here for my right side, that you see there's a gentleman who cannot lay down. That's because he had been seriously beaten by the captain and also the staff. And after working for 7 months, he got seriously injured, and the captain just put him in a hotel, I think near the island of Guam, on the Guam Island, and only and stayed and asked him to stay in a hotel, not in the hospital, never go to the hospital, and then put him back to Indonesia. So after that, he just paralyzed, and he cannot work or even get any compensation from the captain, from the Taiwanese vessel. So this case is still being investigated. I think it also catch attention from the ITF, but they can do nothing. That's because the recruitment agency in Indonesia, they just run away, and so all the documents disappear. So there are many cases like that. And in my left side, then you see this case. It was happened recently last year in September. His name is Supriyanto, and he also got seriously beaten by the Taiwanese captain and also the Indonesian crew, because the Taiwanese captain urged and encouraged the crew members to beaten him to get promotion. Yeah. So Supriyanto died because of kind of injuries of infectious, but there's no. According to the let's say the inspection, and they cannot find direct. Okay.
2 more
It's,
minutes.
2 minutes. Okay, they cannot find direct links to this kind of forced labor or violence, maritime violence. So this case is still need to be reinitiated. And then you see the case of the upside is the case of Giant Ocean case. Giant Ocean case is a Taiwan capital-based. A Taiwan capital recruitment agency based in Cambodia, and they recruit Cambodian fishermen to work in Taiwanese vessels. So it's a cross-national crime. And the downside is a case that 75 Indonesian fishermen abandoned by Taiwanese vessels and which was detained in Cape Town by the South African government. So the Taiwanese captain, they just run away, and they just close the companies, and for these 75 Indonesian fishermen, they cannot even get any compensation. So these are cases that recently been widely reported. And I totally agree with Peter when he mentioned about this kind of vicious supply chain. I think Taiwan, the case that I reported here is fully corresponds to such kind of situation. So I look forward more discussion. So after our presentation, thank you.
I guess when we look at case studies, always the situation is, the gravity of the situation becomes very clear. So I think we have gone from sort of the more macro picture, global picture, down to very concrete individual cases, and show that how global supply chain has its downside in terms of evading many of the legal requirements. So on that note, I would invite Claude to give his comment and voice.
You will get comment from someone who knows nothing about the green economy, the blue economy, or the blue environment. I am someone who comes from the terrestrial environment. I spent all my career dealing with the World Bank and other institutions, looking at the forest for the timber. And then suddenly, when I was in the forest of Vietnam, I discovered something else. That the forest is in fact producing a lot of goods, for instance, medicinal and aromatic plant. And there is millions of people living from the forest, from this medicinal and aromatic plant. So I decided to change my hat and become an environment specialist dealing with biotrade. So when I've been asked to come here, I could not offer anything on the aspect of blue environment or blue economy. This is not my field of activity. But looking at the slides, what's presented by David, I look at this complexity of institution around. And then I listened to the presentation of all these famous experts and people, and asking myself, what's the solution of the problem? What is the problem with all these institutions? We are working, perhaps thousands of people in office and so on, and apparently do nothing. Am I right? Am I wrong? I don't know. So, I tried to, for this presentation, I tried to look at my activity into the biotrade framework established and promoted by UNCTAD. And I see, from my experience with the terrestrial biodiversity, can I offer something? And I come to these 5 different recommendations that you can accept, but I will try to convince you that they are worth something. First of all the presenters have mentioned supply chain. I would mention value chain. Is it possible that in the fish sector we can move from supply chain to value chain? What's the difference? Supply chain is just a management to maximize profit by reducing the number of links in the chain and keeping cost incurred and time to a minimum. The difference when you talk about value chain, its objective is to add incremental value in the marketplace by differentiating them from similar products based on product attributes, such as geographic location, environment stewardship, like ISO certification, like MSC label, eco-labeling, fair trade. Nobody talk about that in the fish sector? I don't know. Value chain can also be viewed as empowering the local people, and which are usually fragmented. And finally, the additional value is then realized from higher sale price or certified or labelling fish product. That's my first assumption on finding a solution. The second one is from providing a policy and financial environment conducive for small-scale fisheries to adopt sustainable fishing or fish farming methods. What I mean by that, it's that we, in fact, should develop small-scale sustainable value chain in the long-term term, which will require incorporating the precautionary and ecosystem approach into fisheries management decision to ensure continued health and productivity of fish stock while protecting biodiversity and fisheries habitat. What does it mean? Enacting policies to enhance the competitiveness of small-scale fisheries, attract investment, and insert themselves into innovative value chain. And the third point I would like to mention is providing small-scale fisheries access to low-interest loan, credit, and/or micro-grants to foster investment in sustainable fishing and thereby help supplement the cost of doing business as usual. The third recommendation that I would propose is exploring ways to develop effective system of co-management for small-scale fisheries and fish and seafood farms. That would include counteracting issues related to open access condition, overfishing capacity, and declining of fisheries resource that would require new type of fisheries management system and conservation mechanism. Most ideal institutional framework for this small-scale farming, fisheries and farming management are community-based co-management regime under which fishers jointly manage fisheries in partnership with the government. Co-management is a shift away from centralized, top-down form of management towards more dynamic partnership using capacities and interests of local fishers and communities, complemented by the state abilities to provide enabling legislation, enforcement, and other type of assistance. As there are many models of co-management existing in the terrestrial as well as in the blue environment, more experience and research, in my opinion, are needed to learn about the condition leading to successful small-scale fisheries co-management. The fourth recommendation I would suggest is supporting small-scale fisheries and traders to develop new organizational model and agreement to increase stakeholder price negotiation power. Adopting corporate social responsibility criteria in line with the three main objectives of the CBD, conserving biodiversity, sustainable use of its component, and benefit sharing from the utilization of fish resource. Seems to me the three principles that should be adopted. Enhancing equitable monetary and non-monetary benefit sharing, as stipulated also in the CBD, and promoted under the voluntary, for instance, UNCTAD biotrade concept. And this benefit should be targeted at reducing poverty through training, infrastructure development, for instance, storage facilities, equipment, financing, for instance, to overcome the problem of cash flow. That apparently that should be the problem of small-scale farming, fishing, and research. And finally, the last recommendation, I would say, increasing governmental and NGO and private sector support to small-scale fisheries to achieve a more equitable distribution of this benefit. Thank you very much.
That was quick.
Excellent.
Première fois que je dis. Je suis
parler en français?
Well, thank you very much, Claude, for giving very concrete and forceful recommendations. And I think what we are seeing now is that there are different treaties actually available, available or in existence, and also coming into effect. So what we have to do is really realign all these different treaties and trying to sort of identify still sort of the missing links to make it all work together. So on that note, I would like to invite Ambassador Jean-Marc.
Jean-Marie.
To give us a comment, also looking at this situation from the African perspective, knowing that we also have a lot of sending countries in Africa to be on this fishing boat. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. You will allow me to shift in French, but you will not be surprised. Some people is here to translate what I'm saying in English. That's okay? OK. Alors, pour parler de la pêche en Afrique, je crois que c'est une activité qui occupe beaucoup de personnes, de près de 200 millions de personnes qui vivent de la pêche.
Occupies about 200 million people in Africa, so it is a very huge industry.
36 pays au moins des pays africains sont des pays qui ont des façades maritimes. Et le continent lui-même est traversé par de nombreux fleuves importants, le Congo, le Nil, le Niger, le Zambèze, et puis des lacs importants tels que le lac Tchad, le lac Tanganyika, et tout cela sont des sources de production de poissons.
At least 36 countries in Africa have coastal zones, and we have also very huge rivers like the Congo River, the Nile River, Niger, and big lakes such as Lake Chad.
La preuve, c'est que ici sur la plage de Genève, on adore bien un poisson qu'on appelle la perle du Nil. La perche du niche. La perche du Nil.
There's actually a fish which is very much loved here in Geneva, which is called Perle du Nil, very much liked by people here in Geneva.
Alors, mais il y a ce phénomène de changement climatique qui affecte dangereusement la pêche en Afrique.
But climate change is dangerously impacting fishery in Africa.
Si vous prenez aujourd'hui le lac Tchad, il est pratiquement réduit à sa plus simple expression. Le Tanganyika, ainsi de suite. Beaucoup de lacs et beaucoup de fleuves sont asséchés également.
Take Lake Chad or Tanganyika and many big rivers in Africa, they are really shrinking to the dimension they were before.
Cependant, l'intérêt du poisson demeure le même parce que le poisson, comme on l'a dit tantôt, eh bien, est une source de protéines alimentaires.
But the importance of fish remains the same because it is a great source of protein.
Alors, la pêche, elle est maritime, continentale et surtout artisanale en Afrique.
Fishery is maritime, continental, and small scale, artisanal in Africa.
Les traditions font que ceux qui vivent de la pêche, c'est des familles entières qui ne font que ce travail-là en Afrique.
According to our tradition, we have entire families living from fishery.
Heureusement, des dispositions sont prises sur le plan local, sur le plan national et international pour interdire, par exemple, l'implication des enfants dans des activités de pêche.
Luckily, there are some regulations being taken at national, international, regional level to prevent child labor in fishery.
Les enfants dans ces zones-là vont au moins à l'école.
At least children are expected to go to school, not to go into the trade of fishery.
Et les personnes qui sont le plus habilitées à mener ces activités, c'est les adultes de tous les genres, c'est-à-dire hommes et femmes.
Only adults are allowed to be involved in this activity, whatever the gender is, whether they are men or women.
Alors donc, quelles sont les caractéristiques de la pêcherie en Afrique? Je vais vous le dire brièvement.
I'll now talk about the main features of fishery in Africa.
Les femmes sont au centre des activités de la pêche artisanale en Afrique.
Women are at the very core of small-scale fishery in Africa.
Les femmes professionnelles sont actives dans la pêche artisanale et elles sont présentes à toutes les étapes de la filière.
Women are present throughout the whole chain of value chain of fishery and at professional level as well.
Elles s'occupent du préfinancement, de la préparation des campagnes de pêche.
They pre-fund fishery activities
à travers achat du carburant,
through buying fuel,
de la glace pour réfrigérer le poisson,
to refrigerate the fishery products,
de la nourriture pour les pêcheurs,
food for the fishermen,
et puis des médicaments pour eux, bien sûr.
As well as medicine for them.
Et les femmes sont également impliquées dans la préparation des campagnes à travers le raccommodage des filets.
And they are also very much involved in repairing or sewing nets, fishery nets.
Ensuite, quand les hommes arrivent de campagne de pêche, les premières personnes qu'ils rencontrent, c'est les femmes.
When men come from fishing, offshore, for example, or wherever, the first people they meet also after fishing are women.
Parce que pendant que les hommes pêchent, les femmes s'apprêtent pour recevoir les captures.
Because while men are fishing, women are getting ready to receive whatever they have brought.
Pour nettoyer les caisses où seront entreposés les poissons.
They'll clean the boxes in which the fish will be put.
Pour nettoyer également le matériel de fumage des poissons.
They'll also clean the material used to smoke
the fish. Yeah, ouais. Et puis pour le salage, pour saler le poisson.
And also for the salting of the fish.
Une fois le poisson arrivé, eh bien, elle s'occupe du tri entre ce qui doit être acheminé sur le marché et ce qui doit être conservé et ce qui doit être fumé.
Once the fishery has been received by the women, they make a selection between what needs to be marketed, what needs to be smoked, and what needs to be processed otherwise.
Et pour la transformation, eh bien, c'est les femmes aussi qui s'occupent du séchage, du salage, du fumage et du braisage.
For the processing, whether it is through smoking or drying, women are very much also involved of all kind of processing of the fish.
Et puis de la commercialisation.
And the marketing.
C'est une affaire de confiance entre les hommes pêcheurs et les femmes qui sont chargées vraiment des piliers de transformation et de vente de la production de la pêche.
So it's a matter of trust between a fisherman and the women who are involved in the processing and marketing of fish.
Donc les femmes jouent un rôle important dans la pêche africaine.
Therefore, it shows the important role played by women in African fisheries.
Il a été créé, pour réglementer un peu le secteur, il a été créé la Confédération africaine de la pêche artisanale.
They have established what is called an African Confederation of small-scale fishing.
Et les femmes sont représentées de façon prioritaire au niveau du bureau et de la réunion de la Confédération.
And within this, the bureau of this federation, women are very much represented.
Et à l'Assemblée générale qui s'est déroulée en 2013, par exemple, elles ont identifié leurs priorités communes, y compris accès au crédit.
During the 2013 General Assembly of this African Confederation of Fishery, women were very much
accès au crédit.
Determined as a priority access to credit.
Parce que le microcrédit ne suffit pas et les taux d'intérêt des banques, bien sûr, sont trop élevés.
Because microfinancing is not enough and bank interest rates are very high.
Et ensuite, comme priorité, amélioration des conditions sanitaires pour la transformation et la commercialisation.
Another priority was improving the sanitary and health conditions in processing fish.
Dernière priorité importante, amélioration des politiques d'aide aux familles des communautés côtières.
The last priority was improving the living conditions of the families in the coastal areas living on fishery.
C'est-à-dire la garde des enfants, éducation et santé des enfants, lutte contre les violences faites aux femmes.
That is how to take care of the children, how to fight against violence against women, and education of the children and so on.
Mais ce qu'on constate aussi, pour finir, c'est que la plupart des pêcheurs en Afrique de l'Ouest sont des pays proches, c'est-à-dire le Togo, le Bénin et un peu le Nigeria.
In West Africa, what one can note is most of the countries where fishing activity is very important are in West Africa. These are Togo, Benin, and Nigeria.
Et ces pêcheurs-là émigrent. C'est des pêcheurs migrants qui vont s'installer d'autorité dans des pays de l'Afrique centrale, qui sont des pays côtiers de l'Afrique centrale, le Gabon, le Congo et la RDC.
So from these fishermen from these West African countries tend to migrate to Central Africa, like Gabon and countries like Gabon, Congo, DRC.
Parce que ces pays-là, leurs traditions ne sont pas des pêcheries, c'est des chasseurs.
Because in these countries, in Central Africa, they don't have a tradition of fishery. They are rather hunters.
Il y a, par exemple, les statistiques l'ont montré, il y a près de 60 000 Béninois qui sont des pêcheurs au Congo, principalement dans la ville de Pointe-Noire.
According to statistics, we have 60,000 citizens of Benin working in Congo, specifically in the city of Pointe-Noire.
C'est eux qui approvisionnent les marchés congolais de l'Afrique centrale en poissons.
They are the ones supplying the whole Central Africa in fish products.
Ce qu'on peut déplorer, c'est qu'en matière d'habitat, ils sont dans des habitats précaires le long des plages.
But unfortunately, they live in slums very near the coastal area.
Et naturellement, cela provoque des effets sur l'environnement.
This does have an impact on the environment, of course.
Parce que c'est des quartiers artificiels.
Because these are artificially and settlement, slums.
Et d'autres régions en Afrique sont des régions les plus poissonneuses, c'est-à-dire les régions la région du Sénégal, la Mauritanie, etc.
Other regions very rich in fish and seafood are Senegal, Mauritania.
Et il faut dire que la flotte maritime, la flotte de pêche en Afrique n'est que de 11% malheureusement. C'est-à-dire qu'il y a beaucoup de potentialités qui ne sont pas exploitées.
But we have only 11% of potential fleet for fishery. That means there is a great deal of potentiality which is not exploited in Africa.
Contre 73% en Asie.
As compared to 73% in Asia.
Or, comme je vous l'ai dit en commençant, il y a au moins 36 pays africains, les 2 tiers des pays africains qui sont des pays à façade maritime ou bien qui ont des capacités de pêcherie.
As I said at the beginning, we have 36 countries with coastal areas. That is 1/3 of African countries.
Donc, des possibilités existent et je pense qu'il serait bon que l'Afrique continue de faire ses efforts pour organiser les pêcheries sur le continent. Je vous remercie.
So you can see that the potentials are great in Africa and efforts need to be made to improve the fishery industry in Africa. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I think you just highlighted where all the world fishermen should go in order to benefit that remaining 89% of unexploited fish. I'm making a joke. But thank you very much also to bring another dimension and different perspective in terms of the fishery industry. Instead of ocean going, and it's very complex, seems to me we're talking about there are transporter activities, but it's still mostly land-based. And I think it's very interesting and very important to keep that in mind. And with that comment, I would like to hand over the moderation to Raymond Saner now in terms of have a panel, and I would invite the ambassador to join, please.
Okay. Well, I think we heard, it was a very rich panel. We heard a lot of information. And to do our best in the remaining time that's available is quite a challenge. What I retain from what I've heard is, on one hand, fishery is an important source not only of protein, of food in general, for the whole world. And at the same time, we have heard that there is overfishing, there are environmental considerations. So as David said, maybe the future of this important source of food products for humanity is in danger to either shrink or maybe even the worst case to disappear. Now, we have on one hand the importance that was put on food, fishery, feeding people. At the same time, we had several presentations showing that the production of food, here fish, the conditions of labor in some parts of the world are, if you just look from the pictures that we've seen, are just not acceptably low. They're simply put close to, as it has been said in several of the publications, as well as here with the presentations, some of the conditions are close to slavery. Slavery, we thought, is behind us, but when it comes to the fishing industry, some of the conditions of labor are just abominably low. So we have on one hand the importance of this food production through fishery, to a large extent terrible labor conditions, and on the other hand also the possibilities that we could make things different, that we could improve if we find ways to cooperate with each other. And I'd like to go back to the first slide that Lichia showed, when we all embarked on these Sustainable Development Goals for the next 15 years. And in particular, if you just remember, we have, in a way, the task ahead of us how to reconcile, for instance, Goal 8, which is decent work for all, and Goal 14, which is to conserve the sustainably use of oceans, seas, and marine resources. We have to figure out, to try to find a way to reconcile these two things, and we already heard that both are problematic. There is difficulties about sustainability because of the way we have overfishing and other difficult situations. So the future about fishery is questionable. And we have working conditions which are, to a large extent, unacceptable. So I'm maybe as a first step, I'd like to ask the panelists how to make sense of these two, at the same time, maybe contradictory goals, that we want to have good working conditions for people working in this industry, which is fishing, while at the same time trying to also prevent overfishing, trying to limit the environmental costs of the current way how fishing is being organized, and how could we ensure the future? The future being, just as a reminder, the world population is increasing, not decreasing. The need for food will increase. An important source for survival for food is fishery. We heard that the fishery as such, there are question marks as to its sustainability. So please, anybody from the panel, could you give us a few maybe suggestions as to how we could organize ourselves to focus on both of these two goals and maybe also on other related goals, not only 14 and 8. Who would like to take the floor? All at the same time. All right, why don't you go, and then Peter, and I saw David.
A few words. What we've seen today, what we've heard this evening, is how unregulated, badly regulated, neglected the conditions of work in the fishing industry are, among other things. One of the things we've seen from other industries is that when people begin to be better protected, better organized, by the way, I should have mentioned the neglect by the trade unions of how this sector is organized, then this begins to give us a more responsible approach, not only from the workers, but also from the employers, of how this is done. This, in turn, leads to better regulation, better management, and better environmental protection. One need look only at the manufacturing industries. The better they are organized, the better the workers are protected, the more the employers are obliged to work together and in public and visibly.
Thank you. Peter?
If we're going to look at fishing, we also have to look at seafaring. And we have to sort of realize that the international community has decided that seafaring was exactly like fishing, as we've been describing it, and that it was no longer acceptable. So in 2006, they passed the International Maritime Labour Convention and have started a system whereby they're going to tackle vessel safety and working and living conditions on board vessels. And what that now means is you have an international system being put in place where standards in the seafaring industry, whether it's the merchant ships or a cruise liner, will actually be radically improved with the training, the certification systems, the inspection systems that go with it. It's a model. The decision was taken to exempt fishing. Very strange, isn't it? Agriculture, fishing, always exempt for some reasons. We've got to bring them into some broad framework. We actually know the systems that work. If you're in seafaring, you will, as a boat owner or an employer, you will have to have a maritime labour certificate for your vessel safety. You will now also have to have a declaration of maritime labour compliance for your working and living conditions on a cruise liner, on a merchant ship. Why can't that same system be applied to fishing? It's as simple as that. It is not, we know how to do it. We've got a system of recognised organisations who can provide the certification within it. Why can't some of these models simply be taken across? We're dealing with the same broad industry, mobile populations, vessels that move at sea, flag state, port state inspection. So we already have quite good examples of how the situation could be very radically and easily improved.
And the impulse for this came very largely from the employers, from the ship owners.
Yeah.
And that could be translated.
Yeah. And just a quick word about the trade unions. You mentioned it. The trade unions are very poorly organised in the fishing. The trade unions are very poorly organised in the fishing sector, less than, you're talking in fractions of a percent. But the International Transport Federation and the International Union of Food and Agricultural Workers, who are the two global trade unions, have organised a counter-to-capture campaign, capture-to-counter campaign to try and organise this sector. The International Transport Federation already organises seafaring workers. They do it successfully. They're now trying to extend that to fish workers. And they are linking up with the IUF, and that will cover workers in fishing, aquaculture, and food, fish and seafood processing. They're trying to capture the whole supply, or whether we call it value chain. But the trade unions are at least trying to raise the profile.
Thank you. David?
Like the question was complex, I have like 6 or 7 recommendations. I will try to be as quick as I can. First, I think we need to introduce social aspect into national and regional fish management systems. They have been done for environment. They never look at social aspects, but they are the ones that monitor. Second, I think there is an element of a strong cooperation between ILO with FAO and the International Maritime Organization. The list and registers of fishing ships are in the FAO under the compliance agreement and International Maritime Organization on the unique vessel identifier. So these are the ones who control the ships. So they need to be more cooperation and see how that can be used to enforce social conventions and labor conventions there. We need to address, continue regulating IUU, but also we need to ensure compliance. And this is the difficult part, especially for developing countries. I think we need to phase out fish subsidies that enable that many of these businesses that are unsustainable exist and force social standards down. I think we need to do a better monitoring on flagship obligations. This is very important. We don't have a means. Basically, we solve the problem saying it's the problem of flagship state. Second, we need to very clearly understand the limits of flagship obligations, meaning, for example, on all these human rights violations, you are not in violation of labor standards, you're in violation of criminal law, and you're in violation of human rights, and that's subject to jurisdictions. You may be in a boat with the Panama flag, but if you are within territorial waters on a port of a country and one criminal action happens there, this person can go out and tell the authorities, and the captain is liable. So I think we need to do better use of criminal law, because we're talking, one thing is suboptimal labor standards, and the other is criminality and human rights. Exactly. And on the points made by Hermio, I think we need to start thinking about biotrade in the blue. I invite him that we need to even have a project on that. And I think it will be very good for small scale fisheries. For industrial sector, it's not going to work that well. It's not going to be applicable. We need to have other tools. I leave it there, sorry.
Great, thank you very much. Excellent list of potential suggestions from all the three who have spoken so far. I see Claude has been eager to get in.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm going from another point of view. I'm asking myself if I'm going to buy fish in a supermarket, and I'm living partly in Spain, where there is a huge amount of fish, wonderful, how do you say that, wonderful presentation of fish and so on. But I don't know anything about all the problem you are talking about. I don't know anything. When I'm buying a kilo of fish, whatever.
You're an innocent consumer.
I am an innocent, completely innocent consumer. Nobody is talking to me. Nobody is telling me the reality that we have presented today. So, you know that we are changing the world, not only a new environmental world or the changing climate world, but we are also changing the society. There is the social media. Why not talking to the social media, using the social media in order to extend all the problems that have been discussed today? Okay? This is, in a way, to meet the goal that you presented.
Okay, we're already doing a little bit of that with the panels and the discussions that we're having at the press club in Geneva. We also have some fishers, by the way, who are doing fishing on the La Clément. I'm just interested, Ambassador, how do you think, after all what we just now heard from the panelists, that there are things that need to be improved, better regulation, as one example, better coordination between international organizations who have treaty power, but they're not linked, or there's no meaningful linking. Mm-hmm. How could developing countries, and particularly now looking at Africa, you mentioned the big number of African countries who could, in that sense, participate more in fishing, but at the moment they're limited in terms of numbers. Exactly. Now, to participate more, if it were to be the same type of problematic kind of fishing, the industrial heavy fishing that's already happening by fleets of ships coming to Africa from Europe, as an example, but also from other countries, what kind of sustainable future for Africa to get into the market of fishing, but maybe in a different manner, not more of the same as we already have?
Merci beaucoup. Je ferai de la même manière que...
Thank you.
La pêche en Afrique, comme je l'ai souligné tantôt, elle est à la fois informelle et formelle. Beaucoup plus même informelle. Donc, il faut réglementer le secteur de la pêche sur le continent. Je vous ai dit que 10%, 11% seulement de la flotte mondiale réside en Afrique, contre 73% en Asie.
Well, first of all, I think it has to be regulated better, because the fishing sector in Africa is very much informal, not formal. And only 11% of international fleet are coming to the coast of Africa. So we need to improve on that.
Just a clarification. I thought it was 11% of African boats participate in fishing, while the majority is in Asia.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think it's not about, or is it about Asian ships or fishing companies coming to Africa?
Les entreprises étrangères viennent beaucoup pêcher dans nos eaux territoriales.
Yes, foreign fishing boats are coming to our coastal zone and territorial water.
Nous n'avons pas... la pêche en Afrique est artisanale. Nous n'avons pas une régulation
Small-scale fishery in Africa.
de la pêcherie sur le continent. C'est pour cela que nos eaux territoriales sont exploitées par les grandes entreprises mondiales.
As we have no regulation, global multinational fishing boats and fleets are coming to the coast of Africa.
Donc, il faut réglementer d'abord. La première des choses à faire, c'est réglementer et sécuriser nos eaux territoriales pour les pêcheries africaines.
So the first thing to do is to regulate and to promote rather the African fleet in fishing in Africa rather than foreigners coming to Africa.
Et maintenant, instaurer des systèmes de pêcherie modernes. Parce que c'est artisanal. J'ai parlé de la pêche artisanale. Il n'y a pas de pêche moderne aussi développée que la pêche artisanale sur le continent.
So we need, first of all, to modernize our fishery system, because right now it is a small-scale kind of artisanal fishery. We have to modernize it.
Et la régulation doit aussi protéger les espèces parce que nos pêcheurs vont beaucoup pêcher les produits qui ne sont pas encore mûrs, si je pourrais m'exprimer ainsi.
We could also have a regulation on the species, because there should be a ban on fishing some species because they are not really mature enough for fishing.
Parce que souvent, le produit de la pêche est reversé encore à la mer ou bien dans le fleuve parce que le poisson n'est pas encore assez grand pour être pêché.
So, sometimes the fish caught in the net are thrown back into water because they are not simply good enough for consumption and not big enough, not mature enough.
Et maintenant, je ne sais pas ce qu'il faut faire contre la lutte contre le changement climatique, parce que je vous ai dit que les lacs sont en train de s'assécher. Le lac Tchad s'est asséché de plus de 3/4.
Yeah, I don't know what to do to limit the impact of climate change, because as I said in my introductory remark, Lake Chad has shrunken by 1/4 of its size.
Voilà.
What to do? Merci. Professor Chung, you have not yet taken the floor. Could I give you the floor?
Just quickly give some points about the feedback to the SDG 8 about decent work for all. And when Lee and Peter mentioned about the problem of enforcement, I just think about when I interview the fishermen, and normally they complain that all the decision maker, they keep a mind of land. They belong to land people. They don't know the people who are living in the ocean. So without this kind of emphasis what happened in the ocean, so normally they cannot imagine how hard, how difficult for the people, how do they think. So I think that is one problem, at least I found in Taiwan. We are land people, so we, for example, we put the fishermen under the protection, we think it is a protection of labor standards law, but the labor standards law is based on the factory. So it's based on, with the physical environment, with the fixed production lines, and to control all the labor working conditions, and to calculate working time. But when you are fishing at sea, how to calculate the working time? And how to really, to identify what's the rest time, to give a holiday is really a problem. And the second thing is to find some better practice. Because now I find that the Thailand, now for the Thai government, they start to think how to shorten the employment term for the fishermen. because in Taiwan, all migrant fishermen, they are obliged to accept a 2-year term employment contract, and it is too long. So, for example, if it's possible to get them more flexible and to shorten the term, and also force the Taiwanese vessels to stay at port, not to long time working at sea, and just I'm trying to give them some rest period. Yeah.
Well, I'm mindful of time. I think we should also open up and let people come and ask questions. May I ask people who would like to put questions to the panelists to come where I'm standing and to put the questions either directly to one of the persons or to the panel in general, but to be short, and whoever wants to talk, please come over here. Introduce yourself very briefly. No, to come here to the microphone.
Okay, thank you very much. Very interesting. I love fish, but you touch mostly on legal and labor aspects, and I have a real serious message to you. It's energy. I'm the president of the International Sustainable Energy Organization here in Geneva, and energy is my big concern, and chemistry as well. Global warming was mentioned. The main reason is fossil fuels. We know it. We try to change it, but difficult. Then the second point, I was very much in petroleum, and I remember the crude oil washing, or the oil spills we had in many, many places all over the world, which is endangering the fish, the birds and the fish to a very big extent. Another energy aspect. The third one is inland lakes and rivers. I'm from Switzerland. We don't have an ocean shore. But I know that it was in the newspapers that chemistry, that means the pharma industry with anti-baby pills, are making the fish in our rivers and lakes impotent. You know, they can't make fish anymore. Yeah, a very important aspect. It's chemistry, it's the pharma industry, which is guilty for that. So our fish harvest in Switzerland is going down and down because of this. These are all questions to you.
These are comments so far.
Comments and questions. Now, the other...
And to be mindful of time, maybe
sure.
Just another
But
minute.
the most important aspect is now, it was in our spring newsletter last year, but I'm very brief. Fukushima caused the whole Pacific Ocean to become radioactive right to the shores of California. And there was a big report by scientists that the fish became radioactive. You shouldn't eat them anymore, causing cancer all over the ocean, Pacific Ocean, for 1,000 years to come. Can you imagine? This might kill the whole fishery. And the last point
could you please close? Yeah, thank you. All right.
The last point. But these are all very important points. It's a question of survival of the fisheries. The last point is fish farms. Again, pharma, chemistry. You know, a lot of chemistry is applied to these fish farms, affecting the food and the health of the people who eat this fish, salmon, for instance. That's another concern, which is chemistry this time. So I worry about also my survival. I just learned last week that the fish is one of the best sources of vitamin E12. That's a good news. But is it affected by all these dangers from energy? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lots of information. I think we should have had you on the panel as an additional speaker. Yeah, okay. Anybody else who would like to put a question to the panelists, please? Could you also introduce yourself very briefly?
Of course. Good evening, everyone. I'm Richard from the Taipei Cultural and Economic Delegation, the de facto consulate mission of Taiwan here in Geneva. And I have to thank all the panelists for giving us this wonderful presentation. And I have to point out that in the presentation of Professor Liuhuang, she mentioned that we have two systems of hiring. yes, that's true. We have two systems of hiring, and one of these two systems is offshore hiring. But just because these Indonesian, for example, migrant fishermen, just because they are hired offshore doesn't mean that they are excluded from our national legislation. Because in the country that they sign, there are this kind of general working conditions like duration of a contract, wages, insurance, hours of work, and all these conditions have to be included in the contract they sign with either with the owners of the vessels or with the recruitment agents. And in case that these Indonesian fishermen are forced to to sign any kind of unreasonable contract, he or she or suffered from any kind of bad treatment, he or she can call a hotline which is provided by the government of Taiwan, and to help them and to provide consultation or any kind of service they need. So let's go back to the topic of this panel discussion. What framework conditions are needed to achieve the SDG target 8.8? I think the most important framework condition is what is needed here is that we have to have a universal framework to include Taiwan, to include each fishing entity. Why I'm saying fishing entity here? Because I think most of you know that Taiwan is not recognized by the United Nations. Taiwan is not a member state in the United Nations. However, Taiwan is doing its best to combat against IUU. So we participated in many regional fishery management systems like UNCTAD. And we participated in these regional fishery management mechanisms as a fishing entity. So we have to have a universal framework to include every fishing entity. So here, I call upon every stakeholder of our International Geneva to include Taiwan, to work together to achieve this SDG target 8.8.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We have strong statements so far. How about questions to the panelists? Please.
Hello, my name is John Gillies. I'm with the International Trade Center. I will have a question, but I will just say one thing first, because which is I'm probably one of the few people who's actually worked on a fishing boat in this room. How many people have worked on a fishing boat in their lives? Okay. So when I was at college, I worked on a scallop boat. I got injured during that first trip, so classic case of lack of knowledge and lack of protection. But my two questions relate to the use of innovation and technologies to innovate within the industry. And I wanted to know what your views are, because I haven't heard much about that. For example, putting a black box on fishing vessels so that we can find out where they're going as a requirement, just as we would with the airplane industry. The second question was on tourism, because I haven't heard much about tourism, and I think there's a clear link between being a custodian of fisheries and tourism. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I'd like to give back the word to the panelists. It's now 5 to 8. It's supposed to end at 8, but let's add a few minutes. So who would like to take the floor of the panel to address some of the comments that were made, as well as the last question or set of questions? Yeah, 2 questions. Who would like to take the floor? Okay, one more, please. I know I was asking for the panelists to respond, but if you have a question, we were short of questions. Please.
I did not attend the whole.
To present yourself.
Yes, Boris Engelson, possibly one of the journalists in this room. I don't know if there are more. I did not attend the whole session. I think it started before my birth, and I was afraid it would end after my death. But I know that ILO has a special committee on fishing. It always has had, because of course it is not as easy to check what's going on 5,000 miles off the coast. And I also know that there are labels on sustainable fishing. You can find this in any supermarket. So I don't know if this has been alluded to today, and if not, why, and if yes, what is the special add-on message you bring tonight to someone who could not attend from the first minute to the last?
Okay. Thank you very much. Panelists, who would like to take the floor? Yeah, David.
Yes, on the questions, I will address first questions, and I might have one comment on the comment. On the first question made on the use of innovation, it has been used a lot. There are new technologies in several areas of the fishing. The most important is the use of GPS and this unique vessel identified by IMO. Fishing vessels, especially of industrial size, have to have it at board. They have to be localized all the time. If they get black off the screen, they may be monitored, verified, especially in the north, okay, and in many developed countries, okay. It's expanding, but it's happening. Also on the gear for fishing, it's improving a lot, especially to make more selective the catch. And also you were mentioning the issue of tourism. And I would say that there is a huge interlinkage. We just had a meeting in UNCTAD where we analyzed both. And basically, I can give you some data. In Latin America, 35% of the catch goes directly to restaurants and hotels. Okay, so it's a very strong link to livelihoods, tourism. Tourists want to eat fish at the sea, blah, blah. So there is a strong linkage. And we can go further. On the second question, on the I will go the second part, the part of use of sustainable brands and sustainable certification schemes. There is a recent report on the International Sustainable Initiative on standards in the blue economy, which is very interesting, and basically says they are evolving, they are growing very fast. They only cover 10% of the sales in supermarkets. I'm not talking informal economy, where the most important are MSC and Friends of the Fish. Important aspect is that most of these certifications cover ecosystem protection, catch regulation, value chain, and safety. But they are not very good at covering, according to this report, almost none does social aspects or gender aspects of the equation. So again, I think environment has gone, let me put this message. Environment has gone very fast, has gone very broad, regulation has gone deepened, governments have taken more on board. On social issues, the link, whether with trade, investment, or other areas, is incipient. And if you bring it, it becomes dangerous in a multilateral forum. So I'm just saying that it's just starting. So
may I just add to what you just said? The last question we heard was a reminder that the ILO does have a committee. So what happened? Is the committee not doing its work, or could it be improved? In which way?
Thank you. Yes, the ILO does indeed have a committee on fishing. This is one of the areas in which the international regulation is well advanced, but at the national level, there's very little regulation, very little coverage in law. There are a few occupations that are almost never covered in national labor laws, and where inspection, that's my colleague's field, is very little practiced. Everybody knows what should be done. It's a matter of getting the countries concerned to do it.
How?
Oh.
Go.
Well, I'm not sure about the how, but I'll give you my own personal view as someone who's actually worked for the International Labour Organization, who's worked for International Fair Trade Labelling Organizations International. The fact is that if you want to deal with fishing and agriculture, the primary international agency would be the Food and Agriculture Organization. That's the truth of the matter. And when you deal with agriculture and fishing, when you're dealing through departments of labour, their outreach to fishers and farmers is limited. That's the truth of the matter. It's just the way the national systems and parliaments are arranged. Hence the importance of cooperating with the FAO. Now, if I give you an example on child labour, and I used to be the global hazardous child labour specialist for the ILO, is we quickly realised that if we wanted to deal with child labour in agriculture, which at the time in the 2006-2007 was 70% of agriculture, we needed to reach out to the FAO and the other international agricultural agencies. We did that in 2007. We signed a cooperation agreement at Director General level on a cooperation agreement on declaration of intent on tackling child labour in agriculture, and then we've extended that to fishing. So these mechanisms do exist, and the good news is the ILO FAO cooperate better together, but it's a tricky one. You can't, if you want to deal with fishing and agriculture in a country, you've got to recognise the departments of labour may not have the mandate or the resources. They don't get out to where the fishing or farming is taking place, and it's a problem we've got to think about.
Thank you. Any other panelists who'd like to take the floor now?
Could I just ask a question? My name is Roger Hausman, and I'm actually a political journalist. And I find it somewhat disturbing, and that's why I'm asking this question. Where are the, traditional left-right political stance on solving some of these problems? And why does everyone seem to disappear when we could actually have a very succinct political argument here that could be used during election campaigns, particularly in the industrialized nations? Please.
This is the last question. Please.
There is I always remember this. This is a very old way to see politics in Geneva. There is a principle called political geometry. Political geometry means that in each issue, all the allies, what you call left or right, or the allies, or the different coalitions, all the different interests change. Okay? In the world of fisheries, the main areas are the friends of the fish and the friends of the fishermen, or the friends of the vessels, or the industry. So it changes a lot. So you don't have left and right as you have in other areas. You will have different interests on what needs to be protected or not.
Thank you. Monsieur l'ambassadeur, encore peut-être dernier mot.
Dernier mot, c'est aidez-nous à protéger nos eaux territoriales pour mieux pêcher.
Please help us to protect our territorial waters.
À installer des pêcheries, des pêcheries ultra-modernes sur le continent.
To have ultra-modern fishery systems on our continent.
Et cela permettrait de créer de l'emploi pour nos jeunes.
This will create a job for our youth.
Et au lieu d'aller remplacer les poissons dans la Méditerranée, ils pourront les pêcher plutôt pour devenir des professionnels des pêcheries sur le continent.
Instead of replacing fish in the Mediterranean, we could instead be fishing the fish and bringing it to the continent.
Merci. Mais une réponse à ce que vous venez de dire. Est-ce qu'il y a quelque chose que les Africains eux-mêmes pourraient faire, ou est-ce qu'il faut, dans ce sens-là, attendre à ce qu'une solution soit apportée pour le bénéfice des pays africains?
Bien sûr. Au niveau du continent, des réflexions sont menées et nous sommes en contact surtout avec tout ce qu'on peut faire pour arrêter ces migrations-là, ces migrations de jeunes en direction de l'Europe, pour créer de l'emploi pour les jeunes sur le continent. Et puis ensuite, éviter qu'ils soient récupérés par les différents djihadistes qui maintenant essaiment le continent et qui créent le désordre et la désolation. Boko Haram et consorts.
Obviously, there is a lot of thinking going on how to stop this migration to the Mediterranean and how to create jobs for youth so that they will not be even recuperated by these jihadist groups such as Boko Haram.
There's, of course, much more to say to this, but because we agreed to end around 8 o'clock, I would like to give the word back to Lichia, and Lichia, could you find a way to close?
I think, as we have heard from our esteemed panelists and the ambassador, that we have really sort of have something, we have tried our best to sort of to take care of the Mother Earth and the environment. So there are some instruments and also actions to improve the condition in terms of sustainability of ocean resources. Somehow, on the social side, as our gentleman over there saying what happened with our left and right debate. And I think, David said it doesn't really apply in Geneva because we have a different kind of political geometry. Nevertheless, I think, we can all agree that slavery is really not something we would accept. And I think, this is something that we could work. And I think Li has made a very salient point about getting better organization of this sector. So in other words, to use the numbers as a way to get bigger voice and to start to work on this particular issue. And I think that has to be tied into monitoring of what is actually happening in the sector and also make it more transparent because some of these issues are really hidden. Most of us, including myself, until that I was asked by my friend Li-Jun saying, can you would you be interested and co-host this particular event with the Geneva Press Club. I have not really studied much about fish. And then when that happened, I walked into David's session looking at ocean economy, and I heard about also the comment from some of the very important individuals who are promoting a better approach to our ocean resources. And subsequently, we have to also to treat the human factor in this equation in a more serious manner. So I think this is how I would conclude this beginning of a long conversation about how to improve the working living conditions of fishermen working on the in a very ultra-modern segment of the fishery industry, but at the same time addressing the question put forward by our ambassador, saying huge population in the African continent dealing with resources, and they also need to somehow find means and support to move forward and modernize this particular sector. So that could solve some of the problems of youth unemployment, but also taking some of the pressure off the shore of Europe in terms of unstructured, unregulated migration. So with that note, I thank you very much for joining us today to this very interesting discussion. And please stay tuned for chapter 2, because I think we just opened a tiny little inch in terms of this really big problem. And we look forward to the next encounter. And so thank you, and I invite you all to join us for a little drink at the back of the room. Thank you.
Exactement.